I once tried to open a lemonade stand right outside my studio here.
Lemonade for sale.
I failed. I tried to follow my government's rules, but they were endless. The government said I had to take a 15-hour food protection class. To sell lemonade? After this, there's an exam. Then I have to wait weeks to find out if I passed. And if I did, I'd have to buy a government-approved fire extinguisher.
I got my fire extinguisher.
And so on. I eventually gave up on opening my stand legally. It would have taken me at least 65 days. And that's nuts. And yet, government keeps adding rules. I say this is why job growth is so slow. Fewer people even try to start a business today because you can't know if you're breaking the rules. This is 175,000 pages. Those are the federal regulations that are on the books today. Few people even understand these rules. But University of Virginia law professor Michael Livermore says regulations are mostly good. Jared Meyer of the Manhattan Institute, he agrees with me. Michael, since you're outnumbered, you get to go first. You gotta admit that this deters people from opening a business.
Well, look, we don't want people selling poisoned lemonade either on the streets in New York City. So the trick is to identify rules that are going to lead to positive consequences, positive benefits.
Government fails the trick.
Every major rule that's adopted by the U.S. government goes through a cost-benefit process to ensure that the benefits of the regulation outweigh the costs.
Yeah, Jared, I hear that they examine all this.
Well, I mean, first of all, on your point that if we don't have regulations, people are just going to be killing their customers. I mean, I expect John's a pretty smart businessman. He's not going to poison his customers or much less make them sick or unhappy, or his lemonade stand's not going to last very long.
And I'll get sued and I'll be out of business or in
there's
jail.
Plenty of things for if you actually harm consumers. But when we have all these rules and all these piles of paper, how is anyone supposed to keep that straight?
Well, 1,000 new pages every couple months?
Some of these rules need to be undertaken in order to update for new information, new knowledge that we have. For example, a major rulemaking undertaken by the Obama administration, we could talk about some specifics here, to cut down on cross-state air pollution. That's been under development for a long time. We've known about this problem, and only recently have we been able to actually adopt those regulations. So it's not the case that just because it's new, it's bad.
But the air and water got cleaner thanks to these regulations. But that was years ago. Now we're getting into minuscule differences. Isn't this a burden?
Minuscule differences, it depends on whose perspective you take. So the rule that I'm talking about, the cross-state rule that cleans up the air, saves tens of thousands of lives every year.
So they say.
That's, again, based on these well-established public health methodologies. There's no global conspiracy of doctors and public health experts.
If he's talking about that we're saving lives at an effective cost, and if regulations actually did that, maybe we'd be having a different conversation. But the EPA, if we look at its Superfund program, we're talking $6 billion or more per case of cancer averted. Whereas the Department of Transportation could do the same, save a life for under $3 million in additional cost. So there's a wide disparity between organizations. We need to realize that the incentive is always to overstate benefits and to understate cost of it.
If agencies were to just make up these numbers, for one thing, the White House office that oversees, that Ronald Reagan put the power to oversee these rules in, would
Stop with the Reagan stuff.
would knock them down. And then number two, they also go through judicial scrutiny, and so courts also oversee these regulations to ensure that the government's not cooking the books.
How about the Americans with Disabilities Act? Everybody agrees it's good not to discriminate against disabled people. But look what's happened. Fewer disabled people work now. Because employers say, if I hire this person, I can never fire them. They don't get hired. When they passed the law, 51% of the disabled were in the workplace. Now it's down to 32%. That's awful.
You would need to really look at that report closely to see about causality. But putting that aside, if we were to find that there were negative job consequences associated with the ADA, I don't think that the right solution is to walk away from a national commitment for non-discrimination. It's to identify what kinds of job training, job placement, and other job program measures to ensure that people are getting slotted in positions where they can succeed.
You law professors don't trust the free market. You think paper and procedure top down solves everything.
Not true. I think the free market's wonderful. What we need are the right rules of the road so that the businesses in the company can maximize value for the American people. If you don't have the right rules of the road, you're not going to get outcomes you want.
Well, look at the rules of the road we have right now. I mean, in that pile you have right there, there's over 1 million uses of words like must or cannot or shall. There's commandments in there. How can anyone keep that straight?
Look, we could simplify regulations, and that is something that there's broad
This is just a
agreement
full employment
across.
act for you lawyers.
And lawyers could actually get to work simplifying this.
But they don't.
Well,
But
that's
you
not
don't.
true. There are actually mechanisms, and there are procedures in place to go through and look at old regulations and evaluate.
Last word.
He keeps talking about protecting consumers, but if we look at a lot of regulation, the way regulation tends to work is who's being protected is established businesses. They're the ones pushing for regulations who want to raise the cost to entry so that smaller competitors can't get in. A lot of times, this isn't every time, but we see the fingerprints of big business on regulation where they want to raise the cost for their competitors.
And they have a whole compliance department that can try to deal with that stuff. Thank you, Michael and Jared.